Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight from a stack of sources, giving you a shortcut to being truly well-informed.
Thanks for having me.
Today, we're plunging into the global transportation and logistics world of mid-2025, and it's quite a landscape. It feels caught between two incredibly powerful, contradictory forces.
It really does. It's an environment that's both, well, chaotic in the short term, but also undergoing this fundamental transformation underneath.
Yeah, fascinating and honestly a bit bewildering at times.
Absolutely. So our mission today really is to unpack a comprehensive market analysis report we've been looking at. We want to pull out those surprising facts, those crucial aha moments.
Right, trying to help you, the listener, understand what's really shaping how goods move around the world right now.
Exactly.
And what's so striking, as you said, is this bifurcated reality. You've got these violent short-term disruptions on one side.
Mostly driven by aggressive U.S. trade policy, creating immediate chaos.
And then on the other side, there's this relentless, long-term structural transformation. Things like tech innovation, sustainability goals.
Yeah, that are just pushing forward regardless. It's like trying to navigate a ship through a hurricane while simultaneously, upgrading its engine.
That's a great analogy. Businesses must be scrambling.
Precisely. Fighting immediate fires while also trying to invest strategically in a completely different future. It's tough.
Okay, so let's unpack that immediate shock first. U.S. trade policy. It sounds less like a coherent policy and more like a minefield right now.
That's not a bad way to put it, actually. What we're seeing is this really complex, legally volatile patchwork of tariffs.
Okay.
There's a baseline 10% reciprocal tariff. That hit nearly all countries back on April 5th, 2025.
10% baseline, got it.
But then layered on top of that are significantly higher country-specific rates. These can range from, say, 11% all the way up to 50%. And while some of those higher rates had temporary suspensions, for trade talks, that 10% baseline is still broadly effective. It's hitting a lot of imports.
And China has been specifically targeted, I understand. What's the situation there?
Yeah, China is definitely a major focus. Earlier in 2025, punitive tariffs on Chinese goods actually reached an astonishing 145%.
145%.
Yeah. Now, that specific rate was temporarily reduced to 30% for 90 days, starting May 14th, supposedly to help trade talks along.
Okay, a temporary reduction.
But, and this is crucial, it's on top of pre-existing tariffs. You still have the Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum, and the Section 301 tariffs on a whole wide range of Chinese products. So it's layers upon layers.
And for many of our listeners, maybe running e-commerce businesses or just relying on smaller imports, there was another huge change recently, wasn't there? Something about low-value shipments.
Yes, a direct blow to that business model. Effective May 2nd, 2025, the U.S. eliminated the de minimis exemption for low-value shipments coming from China and Hong Kong.
Okay, explain de minimis for us quickly.
Right. So previously, goods valued under $800 could enter the U.S. duty-free. That was the de minimis threshold. That's now gone specifically for shipments from China and Hong Kong.
Which changes the whole calculation for direct-to-consumer.
Fundamentally, it makes many small-value imports much less viable economically. It's a big hit to those sellers.
And just to add more fun to the mix, I hear there's a legal battle over some of these tariffs. More uncertainty.
There is, yeah, and it adds immense risk. Back in May, the U.S. Court of International Trade actually ruled that tariffs imposed under IEPA, that's the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, were illegal.
IEPA, isn't that usually for, national emergencies, freezing assets?
Exactly. It's a powerful tool, not typically used for broad tariffs like this. But then, almost immediately, a federal appeals court issued a stay. Meaning the tariffs remain in place while the appeal happens. So importers are stuck paying duties that might eventually be deemed unlawful, but with no clear path to getting refunds if they are.
So, impossible to plan long-term.
Virtually impossible. That legal limbo creates huge planning headaches.
Okay, so given all this policy chaos, the legal uncertainty, what was the immediate, tangible impact? How did this ripple through actual supply chains? It sounds like it caused a massive bullwhip effect.
It absolutely did. The main reaction from businesses facing these tariff hikes, these expiring reductions, was this huge wave of front-loading.
Meaning they just rushed orders.
Exactly. Companies scrambled to import goods in Q1 and Q2 of 2025 to beat the deadlines. This created a completely artificial, policy-driven surge in ocean freight demand.
I remember hearing about crazy shipping rates around then. What were we actually seeing?
Oh, they were wild. In early June, trans-Pacific spot rates to the U.S. West Coast literally doubled. They soared past $5,400 per 40-foot container, the FEU.
Doubled. Wow.
And East Coast rates climbed over 60%, hitting more than $6,400 per FEU. Some shippers were reporting paying close to $7,200. It was pure calendar-driven panic buying of space.
But then came the whiplash, right? Because that demand wasn't real consumer buying pulling it through.
Precisely. That artificial surge just couldn't last. It quickly gave way to a dramatic demand collapse. U.S. container import volumes fell, get this, 9.7% in May alone, month over month.
Almost 10% in 1 month. That sounds huge.
It is. To give you some context, to drop that sharp, historically, we've only really seen that during the initial shock of the COVID-19 pandemic back in 2020.
So a major shock to the system.
Absolutely. And as a direct result, ocean rates started cooling rapidly in late June. West Coast rates, for instance, dropped 7% in just a single week. The bubble burst.
So this false peak season, as you called it, driven purely by policy and not real demand, it must have fundamentally changed how companies manage inventory. What happened to things like just-in-time?
It's essentially killed just-in-time inventory as like a universal strategy. Businesses are now pretty much forced into a just-in-case approach.
Meaning holding more stock.
Yeah, building up significant inventory buffers, trying to protect themselves against future policy shocks, market volatility, whatever comes next.
Which must put pressure on warehouses.
Immense pressure. Warehousing capacity is tight across the country, and it dramatically increases storage costs. It's a costly pivot, but for many it feels necessary right now.
Okay, and how is the rest of the world reacting? China obviously isn't happy. Are companies just ditching China entirely, or is it more complicated?
Well, China, predictably, hit back with its own retaliatory tariffs.
Yeah.
Things like U.S. agriculture, natural resources, energy exports are getting hit. That further complicates global trade flows.
Right.
But the broader, more strategic response we're seeing is that the China plus one strategy, diversifying sourcing beyond just China, it's no longer just a strategic option on a PowerPoint slide. It's become an urgent operational imperative.
So where are they going?
Companies are rapidly diversifying sourcing.
Mm-hmm.
Southeast Asia is huge. Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, also India, and very notably Mexico.
Mexico. Interesting. So does that mean Chinese goods aren't coming into the U.S. anymore, or are they just taking a different route?
This is what's really fascinating and maybe a bit counterintuitive. Despite all the tariffs and rhetoric, our analysis shows a surprising resilience of Chinese goods in the U.S. market.
Wow.
They are indeed being rerouted, often through third countries, and Mexico is a prime example. Goods might undergo some final processing or finishing there, or maybe just get transshipped before entering the U.S.
Adding complexity and cost, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. Significant logistical complexity, extra costs, longer transit times. You've got additional customs clearances, transshipment fees. It ultimately means a higher landed cost for businesses and probably consumers too. But the goods are still finding their way to market. It's a workaround.
Okay, let's move from the high seas to the asphalt. This bullwhip effect, the tariff chaos, it has to be hitting the ground level hard, right? Especially of the U.S. trucking market. What's the situation there?
Yeah, it's grim. The U.S. freight market is struggling through its third year of recessionary conditions. We hope for a recovery, but the first half of 2025, it just stalled completely.
And why is that? Is it just the inventory overhang?
That's the primary driver, yes. That massive inventory glut we talked about, built up during the front loading, it led to a pervasive destocking cycle. Businesses are laser-focused on selling what they already have, not ordering new stuff, which directly suppresses demand for new freight movement.
And if things aren't urgent, I guess shippers look for cheaper options too.
Exactly. With delivery times being less critical for a lot of this excess inventory, shippers are increasingly shifting freight from more expensive long-haul trucking to cheaper real intermodal services.
Using rail like storage.
Pretty much, yeah. Using intermodal as rolling storage. This has caused long-haul trucking demand to just collapse down 25% year over year.
25%? Ouch.
Yeah. And you add other factors compounding it. Consumer spending shifting more towards services than goods, a pretty muted housing market, sluggish hiring, falling consumer confidence, and this structural shift we're seeing towards companies expanding their own private fleets. It all adds up to a very, very challenging environment for hire trucking companies.
It sounds like there must be significant financial pain out there for truckers. What are the real-world consequences we're actually seeing?
The financial strain is acute. We're seeing a definite surge in bankruptcy filings, and it's hitting carriers of all sizes. We saw reports about Texas-based Balkan Express with 159 trucks, a big Detroit-based grocery hauler with over 300 trucks. both filing recently.
So capacity leaving the market?
Yes. And net revocations of trucking operating authorities, basically. Companies handing back their licenses to operate remain high. It's a clear sign that capacity is being forced out.
And the human cost. Layoffs.
Sadly, yes, it's severe. Nearly 9,000 freight-related jobs cut across the U.S. and Mexico in just the recent weeks we looked at.
Yeah.
Big names, too. Penske Logistics, UPS cutting back, U.S. Express, even truck manufacturers like Volvo Trucks and Mack Trucks announcing reductions.
Because costs are still high, even if rates are low.
That's the killer squeeze. Operational costs, insurance, parts, maintenance, driver wages, they're relentlessly rising.
Yeah.
But freight rates are depressed. Margins are just getting crushed.
So while this is obviously incredibly painful right now, is there a sense that this capacity correction, as they call it, is setting the stage for something different down the road?
It is, paradoxically. It's agonizing in the short term, no question. But this process, the bankruptcies, the layoffs, even new barriers, making it harder to start a trucking company like stricter federal vetting or these new English language proficiency requirements for drivers, it is shrinking the available capacity.
Making the market tighter.
Exactly. It makes the market fragile and highly susceptible to a really sharp inflationary rate spike whenever a demand catalyst finally appears. So this painful contraction today is, in a way, sowing the seeds for a dramatic market recovery, or maybe even overshoot later on. The famine today could lead to the feast tomorrow.
Are these trucking challenges unique to the U.S., or are we seeing similar things happening elsewhere, like in Europe?
What's striking is how similar the challenges are in Europe, actually. They're also grappling with stagnant economic growth. Germany and France, in particular, are struggling. And they have that same post-pandemic shift in consumer spending, away from goods towards services.
Driver shortage is still a problem there, too.
A critical issue, yes. Europe has a severe and persistent shortage of qualified truck drivers. It's leading to this weird situation where freight offers are rising because shippers need capacity, but actual carrier activity is declining because there just aren't enough drivers to move the goods.
And I imagine new regulations are adding pressure for European carriers as well.
Absolutely. They've got new digital tachographs rolling out for tracking driver hours, new custom systems like ACE Import Plus, and of course the big decarbonization push. It all adds cost and operational complexity.
Any labor news?
Well, we just saw the end of a 3-week strike by over 2,100 DHL Express workers in Canada, represented by Unifor. And back in the U.S., there's this new English language proficiency assessment from Carrier's Edge.
What's that about?
It's designed to help carriers comply with the federal regulation 49 CFR Section 391.1b2 for the technically minded. Basically, it's part of a broader regulatory push to ensure drivers have enough English skills for safety signs, communication, filling out forms.
Which could make the driver pool even tighter.
It potentially could, yes. Yeah. Another factor tightening that labor market.
Okay, from the roads, let's head back to the open ocean. That sector, too, you mentioned the rate spikes. It's been on a real roller coaster. Unsustainable swings, really.
It really has been an incredibly volatile ride. That second quarter of 2025 saw just dramatic swings in trans-Pacific rates. Like we said, that early June spike from the front loading.
The doubling to the West Coast, 60% jump to the East Coast.
Right. Asia-U.S. West Coast doubling past $5,400 FEU. East Coast surging over 60% to more than $6,400 FEU, some paying nearly $7,200. Just crazy numbers driven by that artificial rush.
And then, boom, the sharp drop once that demand disappeared.
Exactly. By late June, you had carriers quickly reinstating capacity, bringing ships back into service that they previously blanked or idled, just as that demand was rapidly waning. The result? Rates fell sharply.
Like that 7% drop in a week you mentioned.
Yeah, Asia-U.S. West Coast down 7% in 1 week to around 5,593 FEU. It just firmly confirms that this was a false peak season. The traditional late summer holiday surge got pulled forward entirely by policy, not by actual consumer buying.
So what are the forecasts looking like now for the actual peak season, August, September?
Not good for volumes. Analysts are now predicting double-digit year-over-year declines in import volumes for August, September, and October. A real cool down.
Wow. Okay, beyond just the rates, what about geopolitical risks? Are things still tense in key shipping lanes?
Persistent instability remains a huge factor, absolutely. Tensions near the Strait of Hormuz are still high. You hear about vessels broadcasting their crew's nationality just as a safety measure.
And the Red Sea. Any improvement there?
No real improvement, unfortunately. A widespread return to using the Suez Canal seems pretty remote, especially after recent attacks involving Iran. Most major carriers are just continuing to divert all the way around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa.
Which takes much longer.
Much longer. It's become a semi-permanent shift, really, and it's absorbing something like 8 to 10% of the entire global fleet's capacity. That just embeds higher fuel costs, longer transit times, and fewer round trips per ship into the basic cost structure of shipping. It's a drag on efficiency that's likely here to stay for a while.
But despite all that instability, you mentioned some signs of resilience.
Absolutely. It's quite remarkable sometimes. Maersk, for instance, managed to successfully reopen services to the port of Haifa in Israel just days after missile barrages hit the area. It shows how carriers can adapt and restore connections even in, active conflict zones. Trade finds a way.
What about port performance here in the U.S.? Is there a clear shift happening in where cargo is landing? East Coast versus West Coast?
A very clear shift, yes. The Port of New York and New Jersey actually led all U.S. ports in volume recently. That indicates a distinct move away from the traditional dominance of the West Coast ports.
Why is that happening?
It's driven by a couple of things. One is diversification strategies. Shippers wanting options in case of potential labor disruptions on the West Coast, which have been a concern. And the other is the rerouting we discussed due to the U.S.-China tariff war. More goods coming via Southeast Asia or even Europe to the East Coast.
So L.A. and Long Beach are feeling the pinch.
They are. Los Angeles and Long Beach, usually the busiest gateways for Asian trade, experienced the steepest declines in import volumes in May. That drop was directly linked to the downturn in direct Chinese imports. It really underscores this broader supply chain realignment that's underway.
How are the major carriers themselves adapting their strategies? Are they cutting capacity now that rates are falling or adding more?
It seems like a somewhat fragmented approach, honestly. On one hand, we saw that rapid reinstatement of blank sailings in June when demand started falling. That suggests maybe a focus on defending market share rather than trying to prop up rates through strict capacity discipline.
But they're also launching new services.
Yes. At the same time, Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd just launched a new express service from Asia to the U.S. West Coast. MSC restarted its Empire service connecting Asia to the U.S. East Coast. So they're still competing and trying to capture specific market segments.
And technology is playing a bigger role, too. You mentioned Maersk using AI for customs.
That's right. Maersk unveiled an AI-powered platform specifically for customs clearance. The goal is to streamline that whole process, which is notoriously complex and often causes delays. Anything to speed things up.
Makes sense.
And the new Gemini cooperation, that's the alliance between Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd, is reportedly achieving remarkably high schedule reliability, especially given how turbulent the market is. One report cited 90.3% on-time performance.
That kind of reliability must be a huge selling point right now.
Absolutely. When everything else is so uncertain, being able to count on your shipment arriving on time is incredibly valuable for shippers.
Okay, let's shift gears completely now. Because in stark contrast to all this immediate chaos and volatility, there's this other powerful force relentlessly pushing forward. What the report calls the unstoppable march of progress in technology and sustainability.
Yes, this is where we see that longer-term structural transformation really accelerating, almost independent of the daily crises. Autonomous vehicle technology is a prime example. It's moving from R&D labs into actual commercial operations at an incredible pace.
So autonomous trucking, are we talking truly driverless trucks on the road yet?
We're getting very, very close to commercial reality. Aurora Innovation, for example, logged over 1,200 miles of fully driverless truck operations. No human safety driver behind the wheel in Texas. They're reportedly on track for commercial launch in April 2025.
April 2025, that's soon.
It is. And others are right there too. Kodiak Robotics, Gatic. They're also aiming for driverless commercial freight operations by the end of 2025. This isn't just theory or testing anymore. It's happening.
And partnerships seem crucial here, right? Bringing different pieces together.
Absolutely key. You see companies like Vey and Kodiak Robotics integrating remote driving capability. They call it assisted autonomy. The idea is a human can remotely take control for tricky situations, like navigating a complex distribution center yard.
So autonomy for the long haul, human assist for the tricky bits.
Exactly. And then you have big alliances forming, like Aurora, Continental, and NVIDIA. They're working together to create a complete, scalable hardware and software system for autonomous vehicles, something automotive-grade, reliable enough for big fleets.
And are there proven benefits yet?
There are. A multi-month test in Germany involving Plus, Iveco trucks, and the logistics giant DSV confirmed that even semi-autonomous trucks, level 2 or 3 systems, delivered measurable improvements in safety and fuel economy. So the business case is building.
Then there's the whole robo-taxi race. which seems to be really heating up, especially between Waymo and Tesla, who seem to have very different approaches.
Oh, it's a fascinating clash of philosophies, technologies, and business models. You've got Waymo, which spun out of Google Alphabet.
Yeah.
They're cementing their market leadership through this very methodical expansion.
Like launching in Atlanta.
Exactly. They just launched fully driverless service in Atlanta. That's their 5th city. And interestingly, exclusively through the Uber app initially. They're now providing over 250,000 paid rides per week across all their markets.
And their technology is different.
Very different from Tesla's.
Yeah.
Waymo uses a capital-intensive multimodal sensor suite. That means LiDAR, radar, and cameras all working together for redundant perception. It makes the cars expensive and the rollout slower, more deliberate. But the argument is it's a more robust and proven system for safety.
Okay, and then Tesla finally launched their long-promised robotaxi service. But it sounds like it wasn't quite the same.
No, quite different. Tesla launched its service in Austin. But crucially, it's a limited test, and it still requires a human safety supervisor sitting in the passenger seat ready to intervene.
Not truly driverless, then.
Not yet. And it immediately drew scrutiny from NHTSA, the U.S. auto safety regulator, after videos popped up online showing the cars driving erratically, sometimes making potentially dangerous maneuvers.
So Waymo's methodical, multi-sensor approach versus Tesla's pure vision-only system, relying just on cameras and AI, what are the big picture implications of those different bets?
That's really the core strategic divide. Tesla's vision-based approach is significantly cheaper per vehicle. Their goal is rapid scaling using over-the-air software updates pushed out to their massive existing fleet of cars. Elon Musk talks about an Airbnb for cars model.
Lower cost, faster scale-up potential.
Potentially, yes. But those early stumbles in Austin raise critical questions about whether a vision-only system, without the redundancy of LiDAR or radar, is truly robust enough for all real-world driving conditions, especially complex urban ones or bad weather.
Whereas Waymo is more expensive, but maybe more reliable.
That seems to be the trade-off. Waymo's approach is more expensive per unit, limiting the speed of rollout. But their safety records so far and their consistent expansion suggest a higher level of foundational reliability, at least at this stage. It's a tortoise versus hare situation, maybe.
Despite all this incredible progress, though, there must still be significant hurdles before we see these autonomous systems everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Many hurdles remain. Regulation is a big one. You have this patchwork of different state laws governing autonomous vehicle testing and deployment, which really complicates trying to operate trucks or taxis across state lines.
Technical challenges, too.
Still some significant technical challenges. Things like dealing reliably with extreme weather, heavy snow, dense fog, and navigating really complex, unpredictable urban environments remains incredibly difficult. Plus, you need reliable, high-bandwidth 5G connectivity for these systems to operate optimally, especially for things like remote assistance or fleet management. That's not everywhere yet.
And the cost?
The high upfront cost of the autonomous systems themselves is still a major economic barrier, particularly for trucking fleets. Although Tesla's Cybercab, which they're aiming to produce for around $22,000, is specifically designed to try and crack that cost problem for robotaxis.
So pulling it all together, when can we realistically expect to see fully driverless trucks becoming, a common sight on our highways?
The consensus forecast seems to be converging around driver-out, hub-to-hub commercial trucking, becoming relatively common sometime between 2028 and 2032.
Hub-to-hub meaning highway driving, mainly.
Exactly. Long stretches on the highway between distribution centers near cities, with human drivers potentially handling the final mile or complex urban parts. And looking further out, projections suggest autonomous trucks could make up maybe 30% of all new heavy-duty truck sales by 2035. So it's definitely coming, but it's a phased rollout over the next decade or so.
Okay, if autonomy is one pillar of this long-term shift, the other huge one is the green imperative. Sustainability reshaping long-term strategy.
Absolutely. It's no longer just a nice-to-have or a PR exercise. It's becoming a core operational requirement, driven by regulations, investor pressure, and customer demand. It's fundamentally changing how goods move, especially on the road and in the air.
Let's start with trucking. Zero-Emission Trucks, or ZETs. How's that rollout going?
It's gaining significant momentum. The report estimates over 52,500 ZETs that includes battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell trucks were deployed in the U.S. by the end of 2024. California, Texas, and Florida are leading the way.
But cost is still an issue, right? Electric trucks are expensive.
The high upfront cost is definitely still a barrier, yes. But policy is actively trying to bridge that gap. States like Texas are using incentives and grants to encourage adoption. Maryland is seen as a leader in planning for the necessary infrastructure. And in Europe, the European Commission is looking at extending toll and user charge exemptions specifically for ZETs until mid-2031, just to improve the business case for fleets to switch.
So policy is pushing hard, but is the adoption rate fast enough to meet climate goals?
That's the big question. CalSTART, which is a clean transportation consortium, put out a warning recently. They said the current deployment rate of ZETs needs to essentially double if we're going to meet the 2030 federal targets in the U.S. So momentum is building, yes, but the pace needs to accelerate significantly.
What about aviation? That seems like a much harder sector to decarbonize, especially long-haul flights.
It is much harder, technically. And Sustainable Aviation Fuel, or SF, is really seen as the absolute cornerstone for aviation decarbonization in the medium term.
How much difference does SAF make?
It can reduce life cycle carbon emissions by up to 80% compared to conventional jet fuel, depending on how it's made. So it's a significant lever.
And regulations are forcing the issue there too.
Yes. Regulations are creating guaranteed demand. The EU has its Refuel EU Aviation Initiative, which mandates a 2% SAF blend for all flights departing EU airports by 2025. And that ramps up significantly over time, reaching 70% by 2050.
So airlines have to buy it.
They do. And that's why you're seeing airlines scrambling to secure supply through long-term offtake agreements. We saw Delta Airlines sign the deal with Cosmo Oil. United Airlines has a big agreement with a company called 12 Free for 260 million gallons of e-fuel, which is a type of SAF made using renewable electricity.
IATA, the airline association, is helping too.
Yeah, IATA launched a platform called SAF Matchmaker, basically to connect airlines directly with SAF producers trying to grease the wheels of that market.
But what are the main challenges for SAF? Is it just cost?
Cost is a huge one. SAF currently costs anywhere from 2 to 5 times more than conventional jet fuel, and the other massive challenge is just scale. We need an immense scale-up, and production estimates are around 450 billion liters needed annually by 2050 to meet global aviation needs. We're nowhere near that level today. It's an enormous industrial undertaking.
Okay, so we have electric trucks coming. We need SAF for planes. But all of this requires infrastructure. I imagine that's a major bottleneck, especially for the trucks.
You've hit on probably the single biggest hurdle right now for widespread electric truck adoption: the lack of high-power charging infrastructure.
It's not just like plugging in a car overnight?
Oh, not even close. Think about the scale. A single Class 8 semi-truck, a big rig, needs 350 kilowatts or potentially much more megawatt charging, is being developed just to charge efficiently in a reasonable time frame, like during a driver's mandatory break.
Okay.
Now imagine a truck stop trying to install chargers for multiple trucks simultaneously. That kind of station could require 20 megawatts or more of power capacity. That's equivalent to the power needed to charge over 100 Tesla passenger cars all at the same time.
Wow, the grid isn't ready for that.
Existing truck stops, distribution centers, and crucially, the local electrical grid infrastructure are simply not designed for that kind of massive power draw. Upgrading substations, running new high-voltage lines, it's incredibly slow, extremely expensive, and often takes years just to get permits and approvals. This critical charging infrastructure is lagging far behind both the vehicle technology development and the regulatory targets pushing for ZET adoption. It's a major roadblock.
So the trucks might be ready, but the gas stations aren't there yet, basically.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. The vehicles are coming, but the fueling infrastructure, the high-power charging, isn't keeping pace.
So, given these challenges, but also the push, how are corporations responding more broadly? Is sustainability really becoming embedded in their logistics strategies?
It really is shifting from being just a buzzword or separate report to a core strategic imperative. Our sources indicate something like 79% of organizations cite stricter regulations as a key driver forcing them to act.
So compliance is a big motivator.
Huge. But it's also about brand reputation, investor demands, and even finding cost savings. So companies are actively investing in alternative fuels beyond just electrification, things like renewable diesel, even hydrogen for certain applications. They're focusing on transparent Scope 3 emissions reporting.
Scope 3 meaning their whole supply chain.
Exactly. Accounting for emissions across their entire value chain, including all the transportation they buy from carriers. And they're investing in smart technologies, AI-powered route optimization to cut fuel use, tools like Uber Freight's emissions dashboard that help shippers actually track and manage their carbon footprint. It's becoming integrated into day-to-day operations.
Okay, let's move on quickly to aviation and rail. How are these sectors navigating the current economic headwinds while also trying to pursue this modernization path?
Well, the aviation sector, as we touched on, has a bit of a mixed outlook for 2025. IATA, the airline trade body, actually lowered its revenue growth forecast recently. That was largely pinned on the U.S. economic slowdown. They're anticipating North American airline revenues might actually decline by about 3.4% this year.
A decline. But are they still investing, buying planes, expanding networks?
Despite that softer forecast, yes, fleet modernization and network expansion are definitely continuing. It seems airlines are playing the long game.
Examples.
Sure. Air Hong Kong, the cargo carrier, recently retired its very last Airbus A300-600F freighter. They've moved to an all A330 freighter fleet now, which is much more fuel efficient. On the passenger side, TAG Angola Airlines is taking delivery of 15 new Airbus A220-300 aircraft to modernize its fleet.
New routes, too.
Yep, new routes are still popping up. Nigerian carrier Air Peace is about to begin direct flights from Abuja to London Heathrow, a significant new connection. Delta Airlines announced plans to expand its Seattle hub with new global routes slated for 2026. And the Paris Air Show just happened, showcasing new aircraft like the Airbus A321XLR, which is a longer-range narrow-body, for customers like Riyadh Air. So the long-term confidence and investment are still there.
Okay, let's check the pulse of the rail sector. It's often seen as a strong barometer for the domestic economy, right? What's the reading from U.S. rail traffic?
The overall reading is sluggish. U.S. rail traffic was up only marginally, about 0.4% year over year in the recent period we looked at. And that small increase was driven mainly by carload traffic, things like coal, grain, chemicals, autos, which is up about 4.5%.
Okay, but what about intermodal? The containers and trailers that compete with trucks.
That's the revealing number. Intermodal volume was actually down 2.9% year over year.
Confirming the trucking recession?
Exactly. It confirms that broader freight recession we've been talking about. It directly reflects the slowdown in consumer goods movement, those ongoing destocking efforts by retailers, and definitely weaker demand for goods coming in from Asia, particularly China.
But while freight rail is sluggish, passenger rail seems to be on a completely different track, doesn't it? Thanks to that big infrastructure bill.
Indeed. A very different story there. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act unlocked an enormous amount of funding, something like $66 billion, specifically earmarked for rail projects. This is enabling Amtrak to seriously pursue its ambitious goal of doubling ridership by the year 2040.
What kind of projects are we talking about?
Major transformative projects are getting underway. Things like the Gateway Program, which is crucial for improving capacity and reliability in the bottlenecked New York-New Jersey corridor. The Chicago Hub Improvement Program, or CHIP, aims to modernize the rail network in and around Chicago, a huge national hub. And the replacement of the ancient Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel, which is a major choke point on the vital Northeast corridor between D.C. and Baltimore. These are generational investments.
Finally, what about technology and labor issues specifically impacting aviation and rail right now?
On the technology front, it's often about tackling specific problems. For instance, the U.S. Department of Transportation announced plans to use artificial intelligence, AI, specifically for carrier identity verification.
Why is that needed?
To combat increasingly sophisticated freight fraud schemes, like identity theft of legitimate trucking companies, which has become a growing problem. In the rail sector, we're seeing new partnerships connecting railcar camera networks with telematics platforms, basically trying to get better real-time visibility into where railcars are and what condition they're in, improving asset utilization and maintenance.
And labor. Still some friction points.
Seems so. On the trucking parcel side, we're hearing the Teamsters Union is accusing UPS of not fully honoring the terms of their big 2023 contract. The specific complaints seem to revolve around things like the rollout of air-conditioned vehicles, the hiring of promised full-time workers, and issues with forced overtime. So, ongoing tensions there.
Okay, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive into a truly complex, fast-moving, and frankly, quite contradictory landscape. Let's try to synthesize these key themes for our listener as we wrap up.
I think the central challenge for everyone in this industry right now, as we've really hammered home, is managing this truly bifurcated market. It's like operating in two realities at once.
Explain that again.
You have to simultaneously survive these acute, painful present pressures. The policy-driven volatility, that nasty trucking recession, the high costs, while at the same time you have to be strategically positioning your business for these profound long-term structural changes.
Like the unstoppable march of technology, autonomy, AI, and that deeply entrenched green imperative, the push for sustainability.
Exactly. You can't ignore either side. You have to manage the now and build for the future simultaneously.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener, whether you're running a business that relies on logistics, or you're just a consumer wondering why things cost what they do, or maybe you're an investor looking for opportunities? How should you think about navigating this environment?
Well, I think this environment demands, more than anything, resilience. It demands rigorous cost control, absolutely. It demands a clear embrace of diversification, not putting all your eggs in one basket, whether that's sourcing or transport modes.
And investing in the future.
And strategically investing in that forward-looking technology, AI, automation, visibility tools. Plus, companies need a really thoughtful, phased strategy for decarbonization. One that balances the ambition and the regulatory push with what's actually practically achievable and affordable today, especially concerning that infrastructure bottleneck.
The businesses that can juggle all that.
The businesses that successfully manage that delicate balancing act, surviving the present while building for the future, they will be the definitive winners in the years to come.
So breaking it down, for shippers, people buying transportation, it sounds like the message is diversify, build resilience. That China plus one idea isn't just a concept anymore.
It's a survival tactic, yeah. For carriers, the transport providers, they have to prioritize financial discipline to get through this downturn. But they also need to be smart about making countercyclical investments in technology now, while maybe assets are cheaper, to be ready for the recovery.
And for investors?
For investors, it's about looking through the current economic cycle. Try to identify those long-term winners who are managing this bifurcation well. Focus on the enablers of this transformation. The tech companies, the infrastructure builders, but always keep a close eye on policy risk. Because as we've seen, policy can change the game overnight.
Okay, so let's leave our listeners with a final provocative thought based on everything we've discussed.
Right. All of this dramatic interplay we've talked about between disruptive policy, these sharp economic shifts, and this relentless technological innovation. It really forces a fundamental question, I think.
Which is?
As companies pivot towards this just-in-case inventory model, as they diversify their supply chains globally away from pure concentration, and as they invest billions in autonomous and green technologies, are we actually witnessing the definitive end of globalized efficiency as we knew it for the past few decades? That relentless focus purely on lowest cost.
And if that era is ending, what comes next?
Exactly. If so, what new economic costs, what new environmental costs, or maybe even some unexpected benefits from increased resilience or regionalization, what might truly shape the next era of global trade? And ultimately, how will that impact the goods and services, the cost and availability that reach your doorstep?
Something to definitely mull on. Thank you so much for that deep dive.
My pleasure. Always fascinating to track.